Cybersecurity has quietly become the most important battlefield in global politics, mostly because nobody voted for it, nobody can see it, and nobody agrees on where it even takes place. This video explains how power actually works in cyberspace, why states keep pretending it is about crime rather than coercion, and why the next geopolitical crisis will probably start with a keyboard rather than a missile. Hello, my name is Gene Botkin. I study technology and its effects on geopolitics, and I'm building a society for people who want to participate in the new space age. Our topic today is the geopolitics of cybersecurity. Let's begin. Cybersecurity entered public life disguised as a mild irritation. Early incidents felt like digital graffiti. Systems slowed, screens flickered, files vanished. The response followed the mood. Install antivirus software, reset passwords, lecture employees about suspicious emails. Governments treated the whole affair as a policing issue, the online equivalent of petty theft carried out by bored amateurs. But that interpretation collapsed once societies wired their essential infrastructure into computer networks. Electricity distribution, ports, air traffic control, hospitals, financial clearing, and military logistics all migrated into software driven systems. Control moved from levers and valves to dashboards and scripts. A flaw in code no longer meant an inconvenience, it became leverage, and a vulnerability in a server became a vulnerability in sovereignty. The conceptual shift lagged behind the technical one. States clung to the language of crime because it implied containment. Crimes have endings. Arrests restore order. Cyber operations refused to cooperate with that story. They were persistent, unattributed, and repeatable. Worse, they produced effects without spectacle, without smoke, without craters, just systems behaving strangely at inconvenient moments. That subtlety matters. Power exercised quietly avoids consolidation among its targets. When lights go out or services stall, the public blames bad managers, budgets, or bad luck, but rarely does it blame foreign pressure. This misattribution protects the attacker and exhausts the defender. It turns governance into troubleshooting. And so, cybersecurity stopped being about keeping systems clean and became about managing exposure. Every networked function offered a pressure point, every update path offered a foothold, and what once looked like technical hygiene revealed itself as strategic terrain. The great discovery of the digital age is that fragility scales faster than strength. As systems grow more capable, they also grow more delicate. Cyberpower exploits that asymmetry. It does not seek conquest, it seeks dependence, delay, and doubt. And it does so without ever asking permission to enter the room. Once cybersecurity crossed into geopolitics, states began treating code the way earlier eras treated railways, canals, and radio towers. They were no longer neutral they were no longer neutral utilities. Instead, they were instruments through which influence could be applied at a distance. The keyboard replaced the border crossing, and access replaced occupation. Cyber operations lend themselves to three behaviors that states find irresistible. Observation comes first. Networks reveal habits, dependencies, and priorities. Watching traffic tells you more than reading speeches. Preparation follows. Malicious code can sit quietly for months, mapping systems, waiting for a moment when disruption would matter. Only then comes action, which is often restrained by design. What makes this useful is that these same tools serve every purpose. A piece of malware might be collecting data, positioning itself for later use, or sending a warning simply by existing. The target cannot easily tell which, and that uncertainty forces defensive choices. Systems get isolated, projects slow, leaders hesitate, and influence is exerted without demands. This is statecraft suited to a patient age. Cyberpower rewards those willing to wait, to test limits gradually, and to accept partial gains rather than decisive victories. It also rewards denial. Even when attribution becomes likely, it remains contestable. Accusations turn into press statements, and press statements fade. Yet traditional power still announces itself. Troops move, ships sail, planes fly. But cyberpower whispers. It lets a state say very little while making others do a great deal. Money is spent on remediation, and attention shifts from ambition to resilience. Political capital drains away, repairing things that should never have broken. The strange wonder of the domain is how little force it requires. No occupation and no ultimatum, just persistent presence inside systems that others depend on. Code becomes diplomacy without conversation, pressure without posture, and power without ceremony. Cybersecurity became a geopolitical issue the day that software broke machinery. Until then, digital conflict felt abstract. Files could be stolen, systems could be slowed, annoyance scaled up, but the physical world stayed intact. That was until Stuxnet. The Stuxnet operation targeted Iranian nuclear centrifuges, machines designed to spin with obsessive. The, the operation targeted Iranian nuclear centrifuges, machines designed to spin with obsessive precision. The code altered the speed just enough to cause wear, stress, and eventual failure, all while reporting normal readings to human operators. Engineers, engineers watched instruments that insisted everything was fine while their equipment destroyed itself. This was sabotage without alarms, the most dangerous kind. What mattered was not the target, but the method. A program crossed an air gap, manipulated industrial controls, and caused real world damage without triggering a conventional response. No missiles flew, no speeches followed, and the silence was the lesson. States learned that cyber tools could achieve strategic aims while staying below the threshold that forces retaliation. And that rewired expectations. Physical security ceased to guarantee safety. Isolation no longer meant protection. And if code could reach centrifuges, then it could reach turbines, pipelines, factories, and launch systems. Infrastructure ceased to be inert, and it became negotiable. Stuxnet also taught restraint. The goal was not destruction for its own sake. It was meant to delay, degrade, and instill doubt. Iran's program slowed. Confidence suffered. Engineers questioned their systems. Leaders questioned their timelines. And all of this happened without a visible adversary. The deeper consequence was normalization. After sabotage proved possible without escalation, it became thinkable elsewhere. Cyber operations refined force, and violence became optional while disruption became sufficient. This was the moment that cyber conflict stepped out of theory and into history. From then on, every piece of critical infrastructure carried an unspoken question, not whether it could be reached, but who might already be inside, waiting patiently for the right moment to do nothing at all in the worst possible way. Once cyber operations proved their worth, states shaped them according to temperament rather than theory. Cyber power did not introduce a single doctrine. Instead, it induced a set of habits. Those habits track history, geography, and institutional culture more closely than ideology. Russia treats cyberspace as an extension of political struggle. The objective is not system mastery, it is uncertainty. Operations blur lines between intrusion and misinformation and psychological pressure. The result is not collapse, but suspicion. Elections feel questionable, institutions feel brittle, and every failure looks intentional even when it is not. Governance becomes defensive, forever explaining itself. China approaches cyber activity as accumulation. Data is gathered patiently, industrial designs, research outputs, and personal information are collected over years. Every breach adds weight to a growing archive. The payoff is rarely immediate. Advantage compounds quietly. Development cycles shorten. Markets tilt. Strategic foresight improves. And it feels less like an attack and more like gravity doing its work. Smaller states adapt cyber tools to their limits. Some use them for revenue, some for signaling, and some for regional leverage. What matters is efficiency. Cyber operations allow influence without mass. They let constrained actors impose costs disproportionate to their size while staying below thresholds that would invite overwhelming response. These styles reveal a deeper truth. Cyber power mirrors national priorities. States focused on narrative control use it to erode trust. States focused on long term positioning use it to gather and retain information. States under pressure use it creatively. There is no universal cyber strategy, only conversion. Access becomes leverage, knowledge becomes pressure, patience becomes advantage. Cyberspace does not flatten differences between states, it sharpens them. Yet the majesty of this domain lies in its honesty. Cyber operations reveal what a state actually wants, stripped of ceremony. Watch how it hacks, not how it speaks. That is where intent leaves its fingerprints, faint but unmistakable. Deterrence was built for a louder age. It relied on visibility, attribution, and thresholds that everyone understood, even when they pretended not to. Missiles could be counted, troops could be photographed, intent announced itself by movement. But cyber conflict ignores these habits entirely. Attribution is slow and often political. By the time a government feels confident assigning blame, the moment that mattered has already passed. Retaliation becomes symbolic rather than corrective. Escalation risks revealing capabilities that are better left hidden. And the safest option is often to say little, patch systems, and move on. This teaches attackers a useful lesson that persistence pays. Meanwhile, red lines blur. What qualifies as a hostile act when systems fail quietly and effects unfold over weeks? Is data theft an annoyance or a provocation? Is infrastructure intrusion, reconnaissance, or preparation? The lack of shared answers keeps the conflict running at a slow boil. Nobody wants to be the first to treat a cyber incident like war, yet nobody wants to appear passive. Alliances strain under this ambiguity. Collective defense assumes shared perception of threat. Cyber incidents produce debate instead. Severity gets argued, intent gets questioned, and evidence gets classified. Coordination slows. Ambiguity deters escalation while undermining unity. It is a bargain that everyone accepts and nobody enjoys. This environment rewards constant probing. States test boundaries the way water tests stone. Each response teaches them where resistance begins and where it does not. Over time, patterns emerge. Weakness becomes legible, and strength becomes predictable. The result is a permanent contest without decisive moments. Cyber deterrence does not fail loudly, it erodes quietly, and conflict becomes routine while pressure becomes ambient. The absence of clarity is not a bug, it has become the condition that allows cyber geopolitics to continue indefinitely, unresolved and oddly stable. This is deterrence without drama, power without posture, and conflict without closure. Cyber incidents rarely announce themselves as geopolitical. That realization shows up as an inconvenience. A hospital diverts patients because its records are locked. A city cannot process payments. A pipeline pauses operations out of caution rather than damage. These events look administrative, but in truth they are strategic. Civilian infrastructure sits at the center of this contest because it is both essential and exposed. Hospitals prioritize care over security. Municipal governments run aging systems on tight budgets. Logistics firms optimize for speed at the expense of resilience. These choices make sense locally, but they create leverage globally. Attacks on civilian systems impose costs without triggering unity. When services fail, the public blames officials, contractors, or abstract incompetence. Rarely does it rally around national defense. The attacker remains invisible. The defender absorbs anger. This asymmetry is valuable. It turns pressure into politics without flags or uniforms. Ransomware illustrates the dynamic perfectly. Criminal groups operate with a wink and a nod from states that benefit from plausible deniability. Payments flow, services stall. Governments condemn the activity while quietly enjoying the distraction that it causes elsewhere. The line between crime and coercion stays intentionally smudged. Elections sit uneasily in this environment. Voter databases, registration systems, and information channels become targets not because altering results is easy, but because doubt is cheap. A questioned outcome weakens authority regardless of accuracy. Democracy depends on trust, and cyber operations corrode that efficiently. But what makes civilian targeting effective is repetition. One incident feels manageable, 10 feel like decline. The population adjusts expectations downward. Delays become normal, failures become background noise, and political energy gets consumed by remediation instead of direction. This is pressure applied sideways. No ultimatum, no declaration, just constant interference with daily life until governance feels heavier. Cyberpower works best when it never asks citizens to notice it at all. Space has recently become a major battlefield in cyber politics. It used to feel remote from daily life, governed by physics and budgets rather than packets and passwords. But that comfort is gone. Modern space systems are computers first and spacecraft second. They run code, exchange data, accept updates, and depend on ground infrastructure that looks suspiciously like any other data center with better views. Satellites handle navigation, timing, communications, weather forecasting, and military coordination. None of this works in isolation. Ground stations link orbit to terrestrial networks. Cloud services process satellite data. Commercial providers manage constellations at scales that governments once monopolized. Space has joined the network, and the network has never been a peaceful place. A cyber incident in orbit does not stay aloft. Disrupt navigation signals and logistics stumble, interfere with timing, and financial systems drift out of sync, degrade communications, and command structures grow brittle. The effects cascade downward, touching civilians and soldiers alike. Space infrastructure concentrates leverage because so many systems quietly rely on it. Commercialization sharpens the risk. Private firms operate satellites that serve both civilian and strategic functions. The distinction matters legally and not at all technically. An intrusion aimed at a commercial system can produce military effects without crossing obvious thresholds. And so ambiguity returns as a feature rather than a flaw. Defense in space faces the same asymmetry seen elsewhere. Attackers need access once. Defenders must secure links across ground, launch, orbit, and data processing. Complexity multiplies fragility, and each new capability expands the surface exposed to interference. The wonder in space once lay in distance. Cyber operations collapse that distance entirely. A terminal on Earth can reach a satellite moving thousands of miles per hour with indifference. Control travels at the speed of light, and so too does disruption. And so, space does not escape geopolitics by rising above Earth. It intensifies them by concentrating dependence in places that feel majestic, fragile, and suddenly very human. The future of cyber geopolitics will disappoint anyone waiting for a single and clarifying catastrophe. There will be no decisive strike, no clean before and after. What arrives instead is constant friction, persistent, grinding, and oddly effective. Systems will keep working, but worse. Updates will take longer. Services will fail more often. Meanwhile, coordination costs rise. Leaders spend their time explaining outages rather than pursuing goals. Each incident is manageable, and together they form a pattern that feels like decline without admitting that it is happening. This is the strategic value of cyber pressure. It does not aim for collapse. Collapse unifies, but friction fragments. A society under constant digital strain grows cautious, ambition narrows, risk tolerance shrinks, energy drains into maintenance, and governance becomes reactive by habit. Meanwhile, trust erodes quietly. Citizens stop expecting reliability. Institutions lose the benefit of the doubt. When nothing works smoothly, competence becomes hard to distinguish from luck. This ambiguity weakens authority without confronting it directly. Power slips rather than breaks. States understand this. They probe because the cost is low and the payoff compounds. Each successful intrusion teaches defenders how fragile their systems really are. Each defensive measure adds complexity that creates new openings later, and the contest feeds itself. There is a strange greatness in how impersonal this struggle feels. Without speeches, without parades, just logs, patches, briefings, and tired administrators keeping things barely functional. History advances through maintenance windows. The unresolved tension is whether societies can adapt to permanent friction without losing coherence. Some will harden systems and expectations. Others will normalize failure until ambition feels naive. Cybersecurity does not force an answer quickly. It waits. And while it waits, it hums softly beneath daily life, turning inconvenience into strategy and delay into destiny, one stalled system at a time. If you found this useful, then like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more work on technology, power, and the new space age. This has been Gene Botkin with Elenarda. End transmission.